today to talk to you about the elements and principles of art. So basically, when we're talking about the elements and principles, what we're talking about is the language of art. Instead of using symbols and words to communicate, the language of art relies on visual elements and principles of design. The composition of these elements forms the style, form, and content of the work. Learning the visual elements is learning the vocabulary of the language of art. The visual elements of art are the basic building blocks of art. These are what every artist uses to create a work of art. In most works of art, you'll see more than one of these. You might even see all of them at one point. They include line, shape, value, color, texture, and space. Line is the simplest and the most complex of the elements of art in its own way. It serves as the basic building block for all art. You can think of line if you're looking for a clear definition, because lots of us, we know what a line is, but how do you really put it into words? A line can be thought of as a moving dot or a point that's long, I guess, longer than it is wide. It can be used to measure distance. It also creates the edges of shapes. It has the capacity to evoke thoughts and feelings and emotions in a viewer. Just like, I guess, the way that someone says a word, I'm sure your parents have at some point said to you, it's not what you said, but it's the way that you said it. That's the same is true of line as well. So line, the way that someone creates a line can create a type of meaning. It can evoke thoughts or emotions or what have you in the viewer. Line can be, for instance, perceived as delicate, tentative, elegant, assertive, forceful, or even brutal with its various expressive qualities. What do you think when you see this Jackson Pollock work of art? This is enamel and gesso on paper, so this is a painting on paper. How would you describe the line that you see? One thing I can tell you about this work of art is Jackson Pollock often made his works of art down on the ground. He put his paper or his canvas down on the ground, and he would stand above it, and he would kind of use his brush to drip paint over the surface. Some people called him Jack the Dripper. Anyway, the lines that you see in this painting, for me, they really capture a sense of movement. It's almost like I'm seeing someone dancing across the surface of this painting. Even though it is very abstract, like I don't see anything that I recognize at all here, I recognize the movement that Pollock must have used to create this work of art. Okay, this line is very, very different. This is a work of art by Julie Muraytu, and it's called Local Calm. This is a print, actually. Most of Julie Muraytu's work is very large, and she creates this work with herself and a team of assistants. She will project different historical maps on the wall, and she will trace over them to create these really densely layered works of art, like the one that you see here. And they feel pretty abstract on one hand, but if you look closer, I'm sure there's elements of things that you could recognize pretty readily. What sorts of lines do you see here, and how might you describe them? So the next element of art is shape. These are areas within a composition that have boundaries, separating them from what surrounds them. Shapes make those areas distinct. Shapes are formed when intersecting or connected lines enclose a space. Shapes can also be communicated through patches of color and texture, so they don't necessarily have to have an outline. How would you describe the shapes that you see here in Jacob Lawrence's painting from the Harriet Tubman series? The first thing I recognize is people. I see the people moving through the space. They feel like they're doing somersaults and turning in the air. I feel like when I look at these, I notice that the shapes represent the human body, but they're also very abstract and pointed. I feel like maybe Jacob Lawrence might be looking at traditional African art and trying to make his paintings look kind of like African sculptures. So another element you're going to see is form. Form is really, a lot of people get shape and form confused. But form is what we use to talk about 3D works of art, such as sculpture. It's like shape, but with a three-dimensional edge. You know, you could talk about form in a drawing too, if the drawing looked three-dimensional, and the artist maybe used shading to create the illusion of form on a flat page. So, okay, this is a great example of the difference between shape and form. On the left-hand side of this slide, you're going to see Piet Mondrian's composition in red, blue, and yellow. And on the right-hand side, we see Helene Brandt's Mondrian Variations. So she is an artist who is working in 1996, whereas Mondrian was working in the 40s for this particular work, who's looking at Mondrian's work and sort of making a new piece that references Mondrian's artwork. So we've got two different artworks here. Which one is shape and which one is form? Absolutely. So the sculpture is going to be the one that shows form. It's showing three-dimensional space, whereas the Piet Mondrian is flat. It shows distinct areas, but everything is flat. So we see the different shapes, but in the Helene Brandt piece, we see form. So there are different types of shapes. There are geometric shapes. These are regular and precise. They are going to have an unnatural mathematical appearance. An example that fits this would be circles or rectangles. You're going to see straight rectilinear edges, and you might see curved or curvilinear edges in these shapes. They very much, I usually tell my students, they very much have a man-made quality to them. Nothing you're going to see really in nature is going to be perfect, but geometric shapes have a very sort of perfectly measured quality about them. The other type of shape is organic shapes. So these are shapes that resemble organisms found in nature, and they have a more natural appearance. They could be biomorphic, or they might be amorphous. With biomorphic, they're going to be kind of like something biological, something animal-like, and amorphous just means very, irregular, unpredictable types of shapes. Here is another example from Piet Mondrian. This is Broadway Boogie Woogie. It is a great example of geometric shapes. Mondrian really, he's another artist that really focused on abstraction. So he liked to simplify the world around him into simple geometric shapes. He's still referencing something though. You notice the title is Broadway Boogie Woogie. So Piet Mondrian was actually an expatriate. He moved to America and he was living there in New York when he painted this painting. And I have heard that this painting is supposed to reference almost like a city structure. I almost can imagine the blinking lights within a city, or almost imagine some of the bigger rectangles as almost like taxi cabs or something like that. Here are some great examples of organic shapes. So you can see right away, I hope, what I'm talking about. Geometric shapes are perfect sort of man-made constructions, whereas organic shapes are very they can be very loose and blobby and unpredictable. They're like something you'd actually see in nature. George O'Keeffe on the left made this painting, Red Cana. She loved to paint flowers from a point of view that places you very, very close to the flowers, so they become almost abstract when you look at them. And on the right, we've got an Elizabeth Murray painting. Elizabeth Murray makes paintings, but instead of painting on a canvas, a flat, regular, rectangular canvas, she creates her own shaped forms to paint on. So she's painting on things that are shaped and three-dimensional. This work is called Tangled Fall. Value is another element of art. The value of a color, the value of a color, my goodness, I'm having trouble reading the sentence. The value of a color is its quality of lightness or darkness, and is whether something is light or dark. Value contrast is how different, the degree of difference between shades of gray is within a work of art. So if the shades of gray are very different from one another, you might say something has high contrast. Drawing objects or figures with a high value contrast makes them easier to see. When we say figures, we don't necessarily just mean human figures. We could mean, anything really. Value pattern is also an important thing to know about, and it will describe the variation of light and dark within a composition. So you might have some areas that have a strong contrast and other areas that are relatively close in their values. So this is a great example of contrast making figures easier to see. So when we say figures, in this case, we're talking about, right, the letters on the ground of the background. So we have the figures of the letters and the ground on the background. Sometimes in art we say figure-ground relationship. So that's kind of what we mean. When we say figure, it tends to mean like the stuff, and then ground will be the background or the space that the stuff is in. So which of these do you think is easier to read for you? Which is the least easy to read? I think both B and C are fairly easy to read. And the reason that they're easy to read is because the white of the ground and the black of the letters in B, and then the white of the letters and the black of the ground have high contrast to one another. Whereas in A, we have two different types of gray that are more closely related in terms of their value. So they're so much more similar to one another. It makes them harder to see. A situation where you often see importance placed on something like high contrast is like billboards. You really want to make those instantaneously visible to people. And you're often dealing with people who are very far away from the actual thing you want them to see. So if someone suggested a billboard be made in the style of A, it would not be a very effective billboard. It wouldn't be seen. You'd want to make it in B or C so that you'd have high contrast. Chiaroscuro is a method of creating shadow, and it is a gradual shifting from light to dark with a successive gradation of tones across a curved surface. So with this painting, this black and white chalk drawing, the artist has created the sense that there is a soft progression of dark and light across the form of this woman and across the form of the drapery and the space by creating chiaroscuro. Subtle shading. Okay. Value contrast can often point to a focal point. So a focal point is where your eye naturally goes in a work of art. Where does your eye go when you look at this painting? Well, it's a painting by Rembrandt, and it's a portrait. My eye goes right to Rembrandt's face. It is a self-portrait that he's painted here, actually. So, you know, I feel like he's almost painted himself in a dark room with a spotlight on. So just like, you know, a spotlight on a stage would make you focus on the action that is within the spotlight, Rembrandt's painting puts our attention on his face because it is a lighter value than the space around it. Okay, so here we've got our next element of art, and that is color. So color, another way to say color, and you'll hear me say this sometimes in our class, is hue. Color, and particularly contrasting color, can be used to draw a person's attention to a particular part of the composition. So that's just like what we saw with the Rembrandt painting in the last slide. He created a way to draw your attention or a focal point by his contrast of value, so his contrast of light and dark. If you use different colors, you know, you can also attract the viewer's eye to a particular area of the artwork or create a focal point. So there are different types of color here. Primary colors, like red, blue, and yellow, are represented on the color wheel. You can see in our color wheel here on the screen, our primary colors are the largest circles. These are the colors that you cannot mix with any other colors. They are kind of the basis for mixing all other colors. The next colors you're going to see are secondary colors. These are mixed from mixing two primary colors together. So our secondary colors on this color wheel are between the primary colors, and they're the square shapes. So for instance, if I wanted to find green, my secondary colors, right, are orange, orange, purple, and green. So if I found green, I can see that it is this square here. The color wheel is kind of neat because it kind of shows you how you make a color. If I wanted to mix green, I would mix together the primary colors of blue and yellow. So blue and yellow come together to create green. Another secondary color here, purple. Blue and red come together to make purple. If I want to know what it takes to make the secondary color of orange, I look for my primaries. Yellow and red make orange. The final colors that you're going to see, on this color wheel are the tertiary colors. So they are mixed by taking a primary and mixing it with the secondary. So if I wanted to find the tertiary color of red-violet, here, red-violet, and how it could be made, I would take the secondary color of violet and mix it with red to create red-violet. If I wanted to find blue-violet, I would mix together my purple and my blue to get blue-violet. Or if I wanted to find yellow-green, for instance, I would mix together yellow and green to create yellow-green. The same is true of the other tertiaries. They're mixed from the secondary and the primary color that lie next to them on the color wheel. Couple other things to see here. We have a couple different ways of organizing color when we're working with color and artwork. And these help us to think about relationships between color that are going to make our artwork successful. There are reasons that certain colors look good to your eye. And often you're going to find, if you think about them, you'll see that artwork deals with some of those relationships and why those colors look good together. So analogous colors are colors that lie next to each other on the color wheel. So if I look for any of these colors that are next to each other here on the color wheel, these are analogous colors. For instance, they're next to each other on the color wheel. I would also call these colors, does anyone else know a good way to call these colors other than analogous? These are cool colors, all cool colors. Those are analogous. Another way of organizing color is to think of complementary colors. Complementary colors are directly across from each other on the color wheel. So if I look for the complementary color to yellow, yellow's complement is purple or violet. One cool thing that you will notice if you look at how this is organized, that a color's complement includes like a secondary color. If you're looking for its complement, it includes what's complement is always the color, the primary color that didn't make it up, if that makes sense. So blue and red make purple. Those colors come together to make purple. Its complement is the color that it doesn't have. It's yellow, across from it on the color wheel. If that seems complex, an easy way to remember it is just look for the color that is across on the color wheel. So purple's complement is yellow, red's complement is orange. Maybe you can tell me what, I'm sorry, I said red. Blue's complement is orange. Maybe you guys can tell me what color red's complement is. So you're right, if you said red's complement is green, that is correct. I want to show you some examples of these colors working together in works of art. And when we see colors like this working together in works of art, we know that color can be organized in different ways. We call these different ways of organizing color schemes. So this painting by Van Gogh has of irises has a complementary color scheme. So we see the purple kind of color of the irises, purpley bluey kind of color of the irises, juxtaposed with purple's complement, yellow. Something like this, just like putting something together that is light and dark creates contrast, having these complementary colors together creates a lot of contrast. They are among, these kind of color schemes are among the most vivid and vibrant of color schemes. You'll see Van Gogh uses complementary color schemes a lot in his works of art. So again, analogous colors use colors that are found side by side on the color wheel. So this is a still from the cartoon Samurai Jack, and it uses analogous colors. So I see red, and I see red-violet, and I see some violet, all creating an analogous color scheme in the background. So these are all colors that are next to each other. I think that the artist chose to do this to make the background seem like it was all kind of related and to give a little bit more emphasis on Samurai Jack because he's in the foreground and he's the only thing that doesn't include this reddish kind of color scheme of analogous colors. A monochromatic color scheme is another example of color schemes. These are compositions that use tints, tones, and shades of one color. So when we're talking about a tint, that is a color mixed with white. A shade is a color mixed with black. And then I said tones. Tones isn't actually on this slide, but tones is a color or hue mixed with gray. So the gist of monochromatic is it's all one color. The more I look at this painting, though, really I see little bits of yellow and with all of these blue greens. So this is not truly a monochromatic painting. It's very close. It's monochromatic with a couple of yellow touches. Some compositions we might say are achromatic. So chroma is a word that means color, and a means without. So achromatic is compositions that use no color. So they only use black, gray, white. These are another way to say this would be neutral colors. These are not colors that are not on the color wheel. If you remember when we were looking at the color wheel, you don't see black, white, or gray included as hues on that color wheel. It's because they're considered not colors within the color wheel. All right. Another element of art is texture. Texture is derived from the Latin word for weaving. It is used to describe the surface character of things through the sense of touch. An artist can emphasize or distort the texture of an object in order to evoke emotional response in the viewer. There's a couple different types of texture. There's actual texture. So this would be something that you can touch with your fingers. An example would be impasto. So this is we'll take a look at an example in just a moment, but it's putting on paint thickly with a palette knife, so it has a lot of surface. Other examples of actual texture, you touch the bark of a tree, that would be actual texture. It would feel rough. A cotton ball would feel fluffy and soft. Those are all actual texture. So if those types of things were part of an artwork, that would be actual texture in the artwork. Another type of texture is visual texture. So that means maybe the artwork is flat, there's no texture that you could touch with your fingers, but they've created the illusion of texture in how they drew or painted something. It looks like it's got a texture, but it can't really be felt. A great example is trompe-l'oeil. This is a French word and style of painting that means to trick the eye. So this is an example of this Leon Kossoff painting, portrait of Miss Pato. Shows a great example of impasto. So you can look at this and see that the paint is very, very thick. If you were to run your hand over this painting, which they would never let you do in a gallery, you would feel the cracks and the raised surfaces of this paint. And this painting, which is painted around 1700 by Rachel Rausch, is called Still Life. This painting is painted in a time where painters really weren't interested so much in developing thick surface of paint. They wanted everything to be, very layered very thinly. Often painters were using what's called glazes, or really, really thinned out paints to create layers of color that, the light shone through and made very bright and jewel-like, but not thick impasto types of painting, which, like feel very opaque on the surface. This type of painting is sometimes referred to as a vanitas painting, or more often something like a still life painting. So the artist was really interested in recording the surfaces and the textures of everyday life. And the more you look at this painting, the closer you get to it, the more detail you see. You see all of the petals of the flowers and the slick surface of the bowl and all of the different textures of the leaves and things that you see there. You see, like, if you look even closer, you see bugs, and you see that some of the leaves are getting eaten by the bugs. But if you were to touch this painting, for instance, you might feel a little bit of texture, but most of the work that the artist has done to create texture here is an illusion. It's all done with how they've used light and dark and color to create the feeling that there is texture here, the illusion of texture. So this is a sculpture by Murray Oppenheim, and it's called Object. It was made in 1936, and it is a cup and saucer and a spoon, and it's been covered in fur. And, the artist really wanted to take some sort of everyday object, something that we're very accustomed to seeing, and make it seem very strange to our eye. So, I mean, I have dishes like this in my house, but, they're definitely not covered in fur. This takes something that's ordinary, that we would experience in our everyday life, and it raises it to a new place where we have to reconsider it and think about it again. Would you say that this is actual texture or the illusion of texture, simulated texture, visual texture? Yes, it is actual texture. There's real hair here. So for sure, you could touch this and you would feel the surface of the fur. Another example of an element of art is space. Some objects exist in three-dimensional space. So some art is truly three-dimensional, such as sculpture and architecture, like buildings we think of as architecture. Other art tries to depict space on a 2D surface, such as a painting. If you saw a painting of a building, it wouldn't necessarily, well, it wouldn't have 3D space. It would just have the illusion of 3D space. You can create the illusion of depth in several different ways. One way is by overlapping the objects. Here, what we're looking at really is a flat piece of paper with some shapes on it. But the artist is given a sense of depth here. This is actually just an illustration. The artist of this illustration has created a sense of depth by overlapping these shapes so that we get a sense that they're stacked on top of each other, even though it's just a flat piece of paper, right? You can also work with linear perspective to create space, and you can work with relative size. So the further objects are away from the viewer, the smaller they're going to look. So an artist might start with really large things in the foreground of an artwork and very small things in the background of an artwork. That's to create the sense of space. Artists use different techniques like relative size and linear perspective to create the illusion of depth in a piece of art. So linear perspective is, again, just another way to create the illusion of art. What we have here in this piece that makes it linear perspective is that all the lines of the side, the buildings, point into space at the same point from above and from below. They create this sense that, all of these shapes are converging into the same point in the distance. So to our eye, this creates the illusion of space. These orthogonal lines proceeding to the vanishing point. Atmospheric perspective is another way to create space. Sometimes this is also called aerial perspective. So the texture gradient of closer objects is one thing to consider when you're creating atmospheric perspective. Closer objects might have a rougher or more detailed surface, whereas objects in the distance tend to, our eyes cannot see the detail in those so much. So, if you're trying to create the illusion of atmospheric perspective, the things that are distant would have less detail and less rough surface on them. They'd be smoother and less detailed, more blurry. So there's also a brightness gradient. I should say this would be better, stated to be a value gradient rather than a brightness gradient. But things in the foreground, typically things that are close to us are going to have more contrast, whereas distant objects are going to be less intense. You can think about this like when you think about looking, for us here where we are, we see the mountains in the distance, right? And the mountains tend to have this smoky sort of quality because they are very far away from our eye. That is because all of that air and the pollution that's in the air and the dust and the pollen and whatever else is between us and what we're looking at. So it's like it makes it look fuzzier and further away. This is a great example of atmospheric perspective that is in this painting by Mangold. This is the oil on canvas. I'm not going to attempt the name of the mountain here, but you can see the things that are in the foreground. The artist has made darker, and he's put some, has put some more detail in here. So we see like little bits of tree, little lights and things like that. Maybe I can imagine there's a city here. But as we look at the distant mountains, they become very fuzzy and hazy and blended out into the sky. The artist has created atmospheric perspective here to create space. So another way to talk about space in a work of art is positive and negative space. Positive space is the objects or figures that the viewer focuses on, whereas negative space is the empty space or the space filled with other imagery that is left over in the piece. This space may not be the primary focal point of the work. It is often crucial to the design. So we can see, you know, in this work of art by Banksy, it's a screen print. And so we see the figure in the foreground and we see the gray negative space of the background. The figure really stands out on that against that background. And one of the reasons, you know, that it stands out so well here is Banksy has used high contrast to create a strong relationship between the figure and the background. He really wants us to focus on the figure. And so, of course, what we see here is, you know, referencing like traditional Christian art. We see like a crucifixion, but we see also gifts, you know, in the hands of like the crucified figure. Kind of maybe looking at the relationship between Christianity's ideas about Christmas versus, you know, what culturally maybe people think of Christmas as. Sometimes people think of Christmas as a time to shop. So I think that Banksy's definitely trying to provoke some questions around those things and wanting us to think about what we believe. All right, so criminal underworld here. So this is a picture of Batman. On the left-hand side, I'm sure you see the figure of Batman there. But on the right-hand side, do you see a different figure? The yellow figure on the right-hand side. I see the character, the penguin there. I guess our minds are more, you know, the same figure was on the left as the right, but our minds are more inclined to recognize the upright figure, I suppose, in this. So this is a very creative use of positive and negative space. So depending on the orientation of the piece, what's up and what's down, you see Batman as the figure, the penguin is, the yellow is the ground here, and then you see the penguin as a figure over here, and you see the black as the ground that figure rests upon. So this is a really clever use of